The world thought it knew the story of Princess Diana, a tragedy sealed in the minds of millions, a beloved princess chased by paparazzi through the Paris night. Her life cut short in a tunnel under the Pont de l'Alma bridge, a narrative of bad luck, relentless media harassment, and a cruel twist of fate. For decades, Versailles, the royal family stood by that version. They consoled the public with words of grief, yet remained curiously distant from true accountability. They blamed the chaos of celebrity, the hunger of the public, the ruthlessness of photographers. But what if that story was not only incomplete, but deliberately engineered to hide the darkest betrayal Diana ever faced? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In the shadowy depths of the Windsor archives, a letter has surfaced, a hidden piece of history kept from the public eye, concealed from even Prince William himself until now. It is a letter written by Diana, trembling with urgency, pleading with her son to understand the real forces that hunted her, forces not of random paparazzi chaos, but calculated malice from within the very walls she once called home. At the heart of this secret stands a name many revered and many others reviled: Camilla. Diana's letter lays bare a chilling accusation that Camilla, long portrayed as the misunderstood lover and eventual queen consort, played a secret and sinister role in orchestrating the events that led to Diana's death. According to Diana's own words, Camilla did more than just watch from the sidelines. She actively greenlit a trap, one where bribed photographers were unleashed like hounds to corner, pressure, and terrorized Diana into an inevitable end. And after the crash, Camilla allegedly soothed the young, devastated William by telling him it was all just terrible luck, a freak accident no one could have prevented. The world deserves the truth. Every mother, every son, every human who has ever felt betrayed by those they trusted, most deserves to hear the story that was almost buried forever. Tonight, we journey back to the heart of one of the greatest tragedies of modern times, not as it was packaged for public consumption, but as it truly unfolded, layer by devastating layer. The night of August 30th, 1997 was supposed to be just another evening for Diana. She had weathered endless storms before: the flashing bulbs, the snapping voices, the pursuit through winding streets. Paris was no stranger to the paparazzi's greed, but something was different that night. Witnesses described a pressure, a chaos beyond anything Diana had experienced before. Photographers blocked the entrance to the Ritz Hotel, vehicles boxed her car in narrow lanes. The escape felt almost choreographed, an escalation that seemed far too calculated to be spontaneous. In the years following her death, the official investigations pointed fingers at negligent drivers, drunken mistakes, and celebrity obsession. No one looked too closely at who might have engineered the perfect storm. No one dared suggest that someone within the royal circles might have lit the fuse until now. Diana had long suspected her life was under threat. She once famously said, "They think I'm a nuisance, but I won't go quietly." She knew enemies lurked in the shadows, but she could never have imagined the betrayal would come so close to home. The woman who would one day wear the crown beside her former husband, King Charles III, allegedly chose ambition over humanity. According to Diana's letter, Camilla's decision to greenlight the paparazzi trap was born from fear. Fear that Diana's continued popularity, her independent spirit, and her relationship with a new lover would forever eclipse the new royal narrative the establishment wanted to craft. For Camilla, Diana was not just an ex-wife to be tolerated, she was a threat to be neutralized. But why was this letter hidden for so long? Why was it kept from William, the very son Diana sought to protect? Sources close to the palace suggest that after Diana's death, royal officials scrambled to control every scrap of paper, every whispered word that might implicate senior figures. Letters were seized, friends were silenced, and the truth was suffocated under layers of royal protocol and national mourning. The letter's survival is a miracle smuggled out by a trusted confidant of Diana, one who feared what might happen if it fell into the wrong hands. It remained hidden in a private estate for over 2 decades. Only recently, through a series of estate sales and anonymous leaks, did it surface. And when William read the words in his mother's unmistakable handwriting, the foundations of his world shifted irreversibly. Imagine being told for years that your mother's death was a tragic accident, only to discover that it may have been orchestrated by someone you had been told to forgive, to accept, to respect. The emotional earthquake William faced cannot be overstated. The letter's contents, desperate warnings, bitter truths, and pleas for vigilance ripped away the carefully constructed facade the palace had spent decades building. William's grief was never just for his lost mother. It was for the stolen truth, the betrayal that robbed him of the chance to properly mourn, to properly heal. The world has been sold a sanitized version of Diana's final years, the charity princess, the fashion icon, the troubled divorcee. You were allowed to see the warrior beneath, the woman fighting tooth and nail against forces far more powerful than the press. Diana wasn't just fleeing photographers. She was fleeing a system that decided she was too dangerous to be left alive. This expose isn't about dredging up old wounds. It's about facing the wounds that never healed because they were never truly acknowledged. It's about honoring Diana's final plea for her sons to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Over the course of this investigation, we will peel back the layers of deceit that protected Camilla for decades. We will explore how a small group of powerful individuals orchestrated a narrative so polished, so rehearsed, that the world forgot to ask the right questions. We will listen to eyewitness accounts that were ignored, examine hidden documents that were buried, and expose the silent war that raged within the walls of Buckingham Palace. You will hear chilling testimonies from those who saw the paparazzi's behavior that night and wondered how it could have been so aggressively coordinated. You will see evidence suggesting that payouts to photographers were traced back to accounts linked to royal insiders. And you will hear from experts who spent years digging into the inconsistencies of the official story, only to find doors slammed shut at every turn. This is not a conspiracy theory, it is a reckoning. Diana's voice was almost silenced, but through this hidden letter, she speaks once more not as a princess trapped in gilded cages, but as a mother fighting with everything she had left to protect her children. Her warnings are raw, urgent, and heartbreakingly clear. "Do not trust the smiles they show you," she wrote to William. "Do not believe the kindness they sell you. They smiled at me too, once." And in those chilling words, a window into the truth opens, a truth too dangerous for the monarchy to ever willingly reveal. Tonight, we honor Diana not with tears, but with truth. We tear away the veil of lies that have clouded her memory. We show the world what she saw coming, but could not escape. We give voice to the terror she lived with, the betrayal she endured, and the strength she carried to her final breath, because sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to stay silent. And so we begin the hidden letter, the paparazzi trap, the secret history that shatters everything we thought we knew about the night the people's princess was stolen from the world. Are you ready to hear what they never wanted you to know in the days following Diana's death? The world grieved in an outpouring of emotion unprecedented in modern history. Piles of flowers lined the gates of Kensington Palace. Strangers wept openly in the streets. News anchors fought back tears on live broadcasts. Millions felt not just sorrow, but guilt, a collective sense that somehow the very public who had adored Diana had also participated in the forces that destroyed her. But amidst the public mourning, inside the cold halls of power, a different emotion simmered relief. For those who had seen Diana as a loose cannon, a threat to carefully managed royal narratives, her absence simplified things. No more shocking interviews, no more candid speeches about mental health, eating disorders, or feeling like an outsider. No more risk that Diana might expose the hypocrisy and backroom deals that tainted the image of the monarchy. This brutal undercurrent was something Diana had sensed long before that fatal night. She knew she was not safe. Friends would later recount late-night conversations where she confessed her fear that one day she would be gotten rid of not by a foreign enemy, but by someone within. Her fears were often dismissed as paranoia. But today, after the emergence of her hidden letter, they feel more like prophecy. The letter itself is a masterpiece of painful honesty written in Diana's unmistakable looping handwriting. It begins with simple words, "My dearest William." The tone is loving yet urgent, a mother desperately trying to equip her son for battles he could not yet comprehend. She writes of her pride in him, of her hopes for his future. But quickly the letter takes a darker turn. "They have set traps for me," she warns, "and they will tell you it was fate." She mentions a plan to push her to run, describing how relentless pursuit by photographers was not simply the result of happenstance or tabloid greed, but a coordinated effort. Specific names are mentioned, names of press figures and, chillingly, names of individuals connected to the royal household. And then, without flinching, Diana names Camilla. "She has given her blessing," Diana writes. "She has played the innocent, but her hands are not clean." These are not the ramblings of a woman losing her grip on reality. They are the meticulous warnings of someone who knew she was walking a tightrope without a safety net, while others secretly loosened the wires. The heartbreak of the letter is not just in the warnings, it is in the hope that maybe, just maybe, if William understood the truth, he would be able to navigate the traps set before him, that he would recognize the smiles that concealed daggers, the words of comfort that masked intentions of control and manipulation. For years, many had speculated that Diana feared for her life. There were whispers of a note left with her butler, Paul Burrell, and other close aides, claims of tampered brakes, of strange accidents, of surveillance. Some dismissed these as the fantasies of a woman hunted by fame. But this letter, written in Diana's own hand and voice, strips away the plausible deniability the monarchy has long hidden behind. The question now is no longer whether Diana was right to be afraid. The question is why it took so long for the world to listen. Diana's instincts had always been sharp. She saw through the carefully crafted images, the sanitized public relations stories, the manipulations that others accepted as fact. She knew that her divorce from Prince Charles was not just a personal failure, but a political earthquake. She knew that her continued popularity, her ability to connect with ordinary people across class, race, and nationality posed a direct threat to those who wanted a more controllable, sanitized monarchy. In many ways, Diana had become bigger than the crown itself, and that, more than anything, made her dangerous. The parallels between Diana's fate and other figures who challenged entrenched systems are chilling. History is littered with examples of those who spoke too loudly, loved too openly, and paid the ultimate price for daring to disrupt the status quo. Diana, with her charisma, her flaws, her authenticity, fit that pattern far too well. What makes her story even more heartbreaking is that she foresaw it coming and tried to warn the one person she loved above all others. Her letter to William is not a message of bitterness, it is a message of protection, a desperate attempt to shield her son from a future where he too might be manipulated, betrayed, or even sacrificed for the sake of appearances. In the end, Diana's greatest act of courage may not have been facing the cameras, enduring the humiliation of public scandals, or even walking through minefields to raise awareness for victims. Her greatest act of courage was daring to tell the truth in a world built on beautiful lies. As you read her words, as you hear her story unfold tonight, ask yourself, what kind of strength does it take to warn your child about a system so powerful it could erase you without a trace? What kind of love endures even when you know you may not live to see it protect those you cherish? The revelations contained in Diana's hidden letter are not just about pointing fingers. They are about understanding the full scope of the betrayal she endured and honoring the sacrifice she made by refusing to play the obedient role assigned to her. The monarchy she left behind has tried to reframe her story. They have tried to cast Camilla as a misunderstood woman who finally found happiness after years of torment. They have tried to present a united, modern face to the world, one that embraces diversity, compassion, and change. But behind that glossy image, old wounds fester, old lies still whisper in the halls of power. William now carries a terrible burden. The knowledge that the woman who helped raise him after his mother's death may have played a role in her demise, a burden not just of grief but of history, loyalty, and the crushing expectations placed on him as the future king. How he navigates that burden will shape the monarchy's future, and perhaps, in honoring the truth his mother fought so hard to leave behind, he will finally break the cycle of betrayal that claimed her life. In the coming chapters, we will trace the steps of the paparazzi trap, follow the money trails that funded the ambush, hear from those who witnessed events firsthand but were silenced, and unravel the web of deceit that has kept Diana's true story buried for decades. The journey will not be easy. It will force us to question what we believe about institutions, loyalty, and the cost of maintaining power. It will challenge the comforting narratives we have been fed. It will stir anger, sorrow, and perhaps even hope, because if we can finally face the truth about Diana's death, we can begin to honor her life in the way she deserved all along, not as a fairy tale princess trapped in a gilded cage, but as a fearless woman who dared to be real in a world that demanded illusions. And maybe, just maybe, we can ensure that her sons and the world she tried to change are finally free from the shadows that consumed her. So prepare yourself. The truth is heavier than the fairy tales we have been told, but it is worth carrying. Diana carried it until the very end. Now it is our turn. Diana's tragedy is not isolated in the grand tapestry of history. Powerful women who spoke too boldly, loved too openly, and lived too authentically have always been dangerous to institutions built on appearances. And the monarchy, with its centuries-old traditions and rigid expectations, had no place for someone who refused to follow the script. When Diana stepped into that world young, naive, and full of hope, she believed she could belong. She believed love could overcome protocol, that authenticity could blend with centuries of hierarchy. But from the beginning, she was seen not as an asset, but as a liability. Her emotions were too raw, her instincts too accurate, her compassion too genuine. She was the mirror that reflected the cracks in the monarchy's polished facade, and mirrors, when they reveal too much, are often shattered. It is easy now to look back and wonder how anyone could have believed the official stories. How could millions have accepted the idea that Diana's death was a random accident, that the aggressive pursuit by photographers was nothing more than an unfortunate obsession? But people believe what they are conditioned to believe. The need for order, for comforting explanations, often outweighs the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Diana's hidden letter does not scream with anger. It speaks with sorrow, with resignation, and with hope that the next generation might see through the illusions she was forced to endure. It is a mother's final act of love, written not for fame, not for public consumption, but for the quiet protection of her beloved son. She writes of the dangers of misplaced trust. She warns William that the faces he sees smiling at him may not always carry goodwill. She urges him to stay close to his instincts, to listen to the quiet voice inside that tells him when something is wrong. In every word, there is a deep and aching love, a desperate need to prepare him for a future without her. The imagery in her writing is haunting. She describes feeling like prey in a hunt she cannot escape. She speaks of corridor filled with whispers, of friends who turn cold without explanation, of plans spoken behind closed doors that affect her life but never involve her voice. And she warns William to be wary of those who offer comfort too easily after loss. In the final paragraphs of the letter, Diana's tone shifts. It becomes almost prophetic. She speaks of the world changing, of old structures crumbling under the weight of new expectations. She predicts that the monarchy will either evolve or collapse. She envisions a future where authenticity, not appearance, will define leadership. And she urges William to choose truth over convenience, compassion over tradition, even when the cost feels unbearable. There is no bitterness toward Camilla in the letter, only a cold acknowledgement of betrayal. Diana understood that Camilla's ascent was inevitable once she was gone. She understood that the narrative would be rewritten, that her memory would be reshaped into something palatable, sanitized, and safe. But she also understood that the truth, once written, had a power of its own. And now, decades later, that truth has finally clawed its way to the surface. The hidden letter is more than just evidence of a personal betrayal. It is a symbol of the countless unseen battles Diana fought within an institution that demanded silence. It is a testament to the resilience of someone who refused to be erased, even when every force around her sought to diminish her. It is a reminder that no matter how tightly the truth is buried, it will always find a way to rise. For William, the letter is both a gift and a burden, a key to understanding the forces that shaped his life, but also a heavy inheritance of sorrow and mistrust. How he chooses to respond will define not only his personal journey, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. In sharing this story, we do not aim to tear down for the sake of destruction. We aim to illuminate, to give voice to the silenced, to honor the humanity behind the history. Diana's story deserves more than fairy tales. It deserves the raw, unvarnished truth she lived and died trying to reveal. As we move forward, we will examine the players involved in the paparazzi trap, the financial trails that point to coordinated harassment, the suppressed testimonies of those who dared to speak against the official narrative, and the cold, deliberate calculations that turned one woman's life into collateral damage for the sake of power. We will not flinch from the darkness we uncover, because to flinch is to betray the courage Diana showed every day she walked into the light, knowing the shadows were never far behind. We owe her better. We owe ourselves better. And most of all, we owe the future a version of history that is honest, painful, and real. Because only by facing the truth can we hope to create a world where such betrayals are not simply accepted as the cost of tradition. Diana once said, "Only do what your heart tells you." Tonight, our hearts tell us to listen, to honor, to remember, to refuse to let her warnings go unanswered. The hidden letter is not just a message from the past. It is a call to courage for the present. And it is a light, however flickering, that can still guide us toward a future worthy of the woman who never stopped fighting for it. Now, the real story begins. Are you ready, Paris? August 30th, 1997. The city that promised romance and adventure had become a stage set for tragedy. The evening began with simple plans. Diana, recently divorced, was spending time with Dodi Al-Fayed, a man whose wealth and connections made him both a companion and, in the eyes of the establishment, a threat. There was an air of defiance about Diana that night. She was moving on, stepping outside the carefully drawn lines of what was acceptable for a royal ex-wife. She was smiling more openly, laughing with less restraint, hinting at a future unshackled from the constraints that had defined her marriage. But beneath the surface, an invisible tension thickened the air. Witnesses would later describe an abnormal frenzy among the paparazzi, even by Paris standards. It was excessive cameras, flashed without pause. Motorbikes hovered dangerously close to cars. Voices shouted her name, baiting her with cruel, calculated precision. It was not excitement. It was not admiration. It was the prelude to a hunt. Inside the Ritz Hotel, Diana tried to enjoy a private dinner. Staff members later recounted how she appeared uneasy, casting glances toward the windows, speaking in hushed tones with Dodi about their plans. They discussed how to slip away unnoticed, how to escape the swarm of photographers that had already turned the hotel's entrance into a gauntlet of flashing lights and jeering calls. It was not a question of whether they would be pursued, but how severely. In the bowels of the hotel, an alternate exit was planned. Henri Paul, the deputy head of security, took charge. He was an experienced man, one trusted to navigate the dangers of public life for wealthy and powerful guests. But tonight, something was wrong. CCTV footage captured him moving erratically, raising questions that would later fuel endless speculation. Was he simply overwhelmed? Was he compromised? Or was he playing a part in a script written by unseen hands at 12:28 p.m.? Diana and Dodi slipped out the rear entrance of the Ritz, climbing into a black Mercedes-Benz. Henri Paul was at the wheel. Trevor Reese-Jones, Dodi's bodyguard, was the only other passenger. Their plan was simple: take an alternate route to Dodi's nearby apartment, avoid the photographers, escape the chaos, but Paris would not let them go so easily. The Mercedes sped off into the night, Immediately pursued by a pack of paparazzi on motorbikes and in cars, witnesses described a chase that was not just aggressive, but relentless. Motorbikes boxed the car in. Photographers leaned dangerously close, their cameras becoming weapons of psychological warfare. The speed increased, tensions rose, and somewhere along the twisting roads near the Seine, a decision was made that would change history. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel loomed ahead, a dark mouth swallowing the road. Henri Paul entered at high speed, too fast for the tunnel. In the moments that followed, the car clipped the right-hand wall, spun violently, and smashed into the 13th pillar of the tunnel. The crash was devastating, metal twisted, glass shattered. Lives hung in the balance between breath and oblivion. When first responders arrived, the scene was chaos. Diana was still alive, trapped in the wreckage, conscious but gravely injured. Her heart had been displaced from the trauma, shifted to the right side of her chest. She was tended to by paramedics at the scene. Her final moments marked not by hysteria, but by quiet confusion. She asked weakly what had happened, drifting in and out of consciousness as emergency crews worked desperately to save her. Dodie was already dead, Henri Paul as well. Trevor Rees-Jones, though severely injured, would survive to tell the partial story of that night. At 4:00 m, after multiple cardiac arrests and hours of surgery at the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, Diana, Princess of Wales, was pronounced dead. The official narrative would crystallize quickly: reckless driving, paparazzi pressure, tragic accident, but beneath that tidy explanation, shadows moved. Witnesses in the tunnel spoke of bright flashes before the crash, of aggressive tactics used by following vehicles that never made it into police reports. Some claimed a white Fiat Uno had played a role, swerving in front of the Mercedes at the critical moment. The car was never conclusively found, its driver never publicly identified. Loose ends dangled but were quietly brushed aside. In the hours immediately following the crash, the French authorities began an investigation, but cracks appeared almost immediately. Photographers at the scene were detained, but none faced serious charges. Cameras that could have captured crucial moments mysteriously malfunctioned or were missing altogether. Blood tests on Henri Paul revealed high levels of alcohol and prescription drugs, but questions persisted about whether he had truly been impaired or whether results had been tampered with. Meanwhile, back in London, the royal family's response was chillingly muted as the world wept. Buckingham Palace remained silent for critical hours, fueling suspicion and anger. When the Queen finally addressed the nation, her words were carefully measured, her emotions tightly controlled. For many, it felt too little, too late. The unanswered questions multiplied. Why had security been so lax for a woman who remained one of the most photographed figures in the world? Why was there no official police escort despite credible threats? Why had Diana expressed fears of an accident months earlier, even writing notes to friends and confidants that she might die in a car crash orchestrated to look like a tragic accident? Her fears were not vague intuitions. She had voiced specific concerns about brake tampering, about orchestrated media ambushes, about being cornered into a high-speed chase she could not escape. The pieces, gathered and suppressed for years, paint a picture far more sinister than the narrative fed to the public. There was a cold, calculated understanding among certain circles that Diana's independence, her growing relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed, and her potential remarriage posed existential threats to the monarchy. Had she married Dodi, the future stepfather of Prince William and Prince Harry would have been a Muslim billionaire, an image that unsettled traditionalists clinging to the old order. The prospect of Diana continuing to speak openly, to champion causes without royal approval, to reshape her legacy outside the crown's control, terrified those invested in maintaining a specific narrative. Her freedom was a liability they could no longer afford. And so the trap was set. The paparazzi were not just eager opportunists that night. They were tools, paid, directed, their frenzied pursuit encouraged, perhaps even orchestrated by forces with far more to gain from Diana's absence than from her continued defiance. The sheer coordination among the photographers, the way the ambush unfolded with almost military precision, hints at an operation far beyond random chaos. The chase was no accident. It was a tactic: pressure her, corner her, force mistakes, and when the fatal crash occurred, the machinery moved quickly to seal the narrative. Focus blame on Henri Paul's drinking. Paint the photographers as uncontrollable vultures. Play upon public guilt about celebrity obsession. Drown out the more dangerous questions with waves of orchestrated grief. But Diana's hidden letter refuses to be buried alongside the official reports and royal condolences. It insists that we look deeper. It demands that we listen to the warnings she tried so desperately to leave behind. The night of August 30th, 1997 was not just a tragic accident, it was the culmination of a silent war fought in the corridors of power, in the boardrooms of tabloid empires, and in the shadowy alleys where loyalty is traded for favors. Diana lost that war, but in losing, she revealed the battle lines for all who dared to see them, the people who lined the streets for her funeral, the ones who wept openly as her coffin passed by, sensed, even if they could not articulate it, that something more profound had been stolen that night. Not just a princess, not just a mother, but a symbol of truth in a world drowning in lies. Tonight, we walk back through the streets of Paris. We revisit the moments that led to that final, fateful turn into the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. We listen to the witnesses whose voices were ignored. We examine the evidence that was buried. And we remember because memory is a form of justice, and Diana deserves nothing less. The night air in Paris after the crash was thick with a strange silence. It was a silence that did not feel like peace, but like shock, the kind that seeps into the bones when something unthinkable happens. Sirens pierced that silence as emergency vehicles descended upon the tunnel, their flashing lights casting eerie reflections against the concrete walls. Crowds gathered, some weeping openly, some standing frozen as if unsure whether what they were witnessing could possibly be real. Inside the wrecked car, Diana fought for her life. She was not immediately unconscious, and in those moments, according to paramedics, she remained calm, asking about Dodi and trying to make sense of the chaos. It is almost unbearable to imagine a woman who had endured years of betrayal, public humiliation, and personal loss, trapped and broken in a mangled vehicle, yet still concerned for others. There is a chilling report from one of the first responders who later described how, even in her fragile state, Diana showed more concern for those around her than for herself. This moment, simple and human, underscores the depth of character that endeared her to millions. She was not royalty at that moment. She was a mother, a woman, a person clinging to life amidst unimaginable horror. At the hospital, efforts to save her where heroic teams of surgeons worked for hours to repair the massive internal injuries she had suffered: the displaced heart, the torn pulmonary vein, the collapsed lung. Every effort was made to stabilize her, but the damage was too great. Shortly before dawn, her heart gave out for the final time. The announcement of her death was met with disbelief. News channels interrupted regular programming. Radio stations fell silent. People woke up to a world that felt irreversibly altered. It was as if the heart of Britain had stopped beating along with hers. But even as the public wept, the machinery of narrative control roared into action. Officials quickly emphasized Henri Paul's blood alcohol levels. They framed the tragedy as a consequence of irresponsible behavior, sidestepping the more uncomfortable truth that Diana should never have been in a situation where reckless driving could seal her fate. They quietly glossed over the fact that her royal protection had been stripped all away after her divorce, leaving her vulnerable in ways no former princess should have been. The royal family retreated to Balmoral Castle, citing the need to protect William and Harry. It was a decision that, while understandable on a human level, sent a disastrous message to the public. The monarchy appeared cold, aloof, detached from the pain engulfing the nation. The vacuum left by their silence was filled with anger, suspicion, and demands for answers. Over the next days and weeks, theories emerged. Questions swirled around the missing CCTV footage from the Ritz Hotel. Reports surfaced that traffic cameras along the route Diana's car took had inexplicably failed. Witnesses who spoke of seeing a blinding flash before the crash were quietly ignored. The mysterious white Fiat Uno, bearing marks that matched paint transfer on the Mercedes, was never conclusively found, and French authorities seemed strangely indifferent to its significance. Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, would later launch his own investigations, accusing British intelligence services of orchestrating the crash. While many dismissed his claims as grief-fueled conspiracies, certain facts could not be ignored. Diana herself had written letters months before her death, predicting that she would be killed in a staged car accident. These were not wild fantasies. These were documented fears shared with close friends and trusted aides. The official inquiry in the United Kingdom, known as Operation Paget, took years to complete its conclusions, echoed the original story, a tragic accident fueled by paparazzi pressure and a drunk driver. Yet, even in its thousands of pages, critical questions were left unanswered. Why was there such an intense concentration of paparazzi waiting for Diana that night? Well beyond what was usual. Who tipped them off with her exact movements? Why was Henri Paul, a man responsible for high-profile security, seemingly so compromised? And most importantly, why was Diana without proper protection when credible threats to her life had been known for months? The hidden letter to William adds a heartbreaking new dimension to these questions. It reveals that Diana did not merely suspect she was in danger. She knew it. She anticipated the tactics that would be used against her. She understood that accidents could be manufactured, that appearances could be manipulated, that the truth could be buried under layers of official statements and carefully managed grief. Her death, seen through the lens of her final warnings, becomes not just a personal tragedy, but a case study in how power protects itself at all costs. It reveals a world where inconvenient figures are not confronted openly, but are quietly erased, where public sympathy is weaponized to obscure private betrayals. In the end, the night that changed everything was not a random twist of fate. It was the final act in a long, calculated campaign to silence a woman who refused to be anything less than fully, painfully real. Diana had outgrown the fairy tale. She had stepped beyond the boundaries set for her, and in doing so, she became a threat that could no longer be contained by polite smiles and royal decrees. The world lost more than a princess that night. It lost a symbol of hope, a living testament to the power of compassion over convention, authenticity over appearance, love over duty. But Diana's legacy did not die in that tunnel through the hidden letter, through the memories of those who truly knew her, and through the millions who still speak her name with reverence and sorrow. Her voice endures. It whispers in the quiet moments when the official stories no longer satisfy. It speaks through the eyes of William and Harry, who carry her spirit in every act of kindness, every rebellion against the expectations that once trapped her. And it calls to us now, asking us not to look away, not to accept the easy answers, not to forget, because Diana's final hours were not just a tragic accident. They were a call to awaken, to question, and to remember that even in a world built on appearances, truth has a way of surviving. Tonight, as we step deeper into the labyrinth of betrayal and courage that defined her last days, we honor that truth, we listen, and we refuse to forget. From the outside, it looked like chaos, a swarm of motorbikes, flashing cameras, shouts echoing across the streets. The narrative crafted for public consumption painted the paparazzi as rabid opportunists, individuals so obsessed with capturing a photo of Diana that they pushed recklessly toward tragedy. That story is not entirely false, but it is dangerously incomplete. The deeper truth is more chilling. The paparazzi on the night of August 30th, 1997, were not merely out of control. They were weaponized. They became tools in a much larger, carefully orchestrated game. One where Diana's every move was monitored, manipulated, and ultimately used against her. To understand how the paparazzi became weapons, we must first understand how the relationship between the royal family and the media evolved during Diana's life. Initially, Diana was a boon to the monarchy's image. Her youth, beauty, and shy demeanor reinvigorated a royal family that had begun to feel stale and detached. She was photogenic perfection, the ideal subject for a world hungry for modern fairy tales. But as Diana grew into herself, as she found her voice and began to speak on issues the monarchy preferred to avoid, landmines, AIDS. Mental health, the relationship soured. The media's fascination with her remained, but their portrayal shifted. They no longer served merely to celebrate her. They began to shape her story into one of instability, recklessness, and emotional fragility. This transformation was not accidental. Palace insiders, eager to diminish Diana's growing independence, selectively leaked information, planted unflattering narratives, and used favored reporters to frame public opinion. Diana, in turn, learned to use the media herself, offering strategic interviews like her bombshell appearance on Panorama, where she famously said, "There were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." After the divorce, Diana's media manipulation became even more precarious without the protection of the royal institution. She was vulnerable. Every step she took, every relationship she explored, every charity she championed was subject to scrutiny and sabotage. By the summer of 1990, Diana's romantic involvement with Dodi Al-Fayed had become the perfect storm for those who saw her as a lingering threat. The idea of the future king's mother marrying into a Muslim, non-British family was anathema to the traditionalists entrenched within the establishment. It was not just about optics, it was about power, influence, and the future shape of the monarchy itself. The media's role in containing Diana became far more aggressive. During this time, paparazzi were not simply staking out hotels or snapping candid shots from a distance. They were given tips, detailed itineraries, even encouragement to provoke Diana into emotional outbursts that could be captured and used to discredit her. Several photographers who operated during this period, speaking anonymously years later, revealed how they were sometimes offered payment not just for pictures, but for footage that showed Diana in distress arguing with bodyguards, looking overwhelmed, appearing vulnerable. Editors sought not just images, but evidence that could feed a narrative of instability. The night of the crash was the culmination of this weaponization. Photographers were tipped off en masse about Diana and Dodi's movements, leading to a situation where dozens of professionals converged on the Ritz Hotel. The idea that this was a spontaneous gathering of freelance journalists is naive at best. Some photographers were reportedly offered bonuses for the most compromising shots, Diana looking frightened, angry, or distressed. Others were instructed to keep the pressure constant, to make escape impossible without incident. The scene outside the Ritz was not an accident. It was a pressure cooker designed to explode. Even the choice of vehicle and driver that night raises troubling questions. Why was Henri Paul, whose blood test later showed alarming levels of alcohol and prescription drugs, placed in charge of Diana's safety? Why was a decoy plan leaked to certain photographers while the real escape route was known to others? The media's role was not passive. They were active participants in a high-stakes psychological operation, knowingly or unknowingly creating the conditions for disaster. Witnesses reported that as the Mercedes sped away from the hotel, motorcycles cut dangerously close, flashing high-powered strobes directly into the windshield. In a high-speed chase, this is not merely aggressive. It is lethal, blinding the driver, boxing in the car, goading it to accelerate faster. These are tactics designed not just to capture images, but to break down defenses and force mistakes. When the crash finally occurred, the media's behavior crossed into the grotesque. Photographers reportedly swarmed the wreckage, snapping photos of the injured and dying occupants rather than offering assistance. Some reports even claim that first responders had to physically push photographers aside to reach Diana. These were not journalists documenting an accident. These were vultures feeding on a death they had helped engineer. Yet the story fed to the public was sanitized. It emphasized reckless driving and irresponsible celebrity culture, deflecting from the uncomfortable reality that powerful interests had encouraged, funded, and directed this lethal pursuit. The mechanisms of media manipulation did not end with Diana's death. They extended into the aftermath, shaping public memory and controlling the narrative that would be taught, repeated, and eventually accepted. Newspapers that had hounded Diana with gleeful cruelty suddenly presented themselves as mourners, painting her as a tragic, fragile figure undone by her own choices. The same outlets that had bribed sources invaded her privacy, and published lies about her character now drape themselves in the respectability of grief. The monarchy's relationship with the media, once strained, was repaired through mutual need. The crown needed favorable coverage to survive the backlash. The press needed access to royal stories to maintain readership. A tacit agreement was reached to protect the narrative, and everyone benefits. Lost in this bargain was the truth about how Diana's life had been systematically dismantled, how her image was weaponized against her, and how the media was used not just to document tragedy, but to manufacture it. There is a dark genius in the way public opinion can be shaped through selective storytelling, by flooding the world with images of the aftermath: flowers, tears, candlelight vigils. The media softened the horror of how those moments had been engineered. The very institutions that had helped destroy Diana were now central in canonizing her, controlling her memory, and insulating themselves from scrutiny. But the hidden letter, the eyewitness accounts, and the financial trails tell a different story. They reveal that the paparazzi that night did not act alone. They were the visible hands of an invisible machine, a machine fueled by ambition, fear, and cold political calculation. Diana was not killed by celebrity culture. She was not destroyed by bad luck. She was targeted by a convergence of interests that saw her continued existence as a threat to their power. The media, in their complicity, became the weapon that delivered the final blow. And until we acknowledge that weaponization, we cannot fully understand the magnitude of what was stolen that night. Diana deserved protection, not persecution. She deserved a future, not a funeral. The manipulation of the media to engineer her downfall is not just a cautionary tale. It is a living warning about how easily truth can be twisted, how quickly human lives can be reduced to headlines, and how deeply injustice can be buried beneath layers of spectacle. As we move forward in this story, we will expose the players who paid for the pursuit, the editors who demanded more blood, the insiders who coordinated the chaos, and the systemic rot that allowed a princess to be hunted to death in the streets of Paris. We owe it to Diana. We owe it to history. We owe it to ourselves, because until the weaponization of truth is confronted, it will be used again. And next time, the victim may not be a princess. It may be any one of us who dares to live too loudly, love too openly, or challenge the narratives that others find too inconvenient to tolerate. The fight for Diana's truth is the fight for all of us, and it is far from over. For years, Prince William carried with him the official story of his mother's death, a story carefully crafted by the monarchy and the media. It was a narrative he had been expected to accept without question: the tragic accident, the reckless paparazzi, the cruel randomness of fate. It was a narrative designed not just to console a grieving boy, but to protect something far greater than his feelings: the image of the monarchy itself. In the corridors of Kensington Palace, where echoes of Diana's laughter once rang, the silence after her death was deafening. No one spoke openly about the inconsistencies. No one dared whisper about betrayal. Instead, grief was wrapped tightly in protocol, and the raw, messy truth of Diana's life and death was replaced with polished statements and staged memorials. For William, growing up in the aftermath of such a loss was a delicate balancing act. He was expected to grieve privately, to smile publicly, to represent a family that had, in many ways, failed the woman he loved most. He bore it all with stoic grace, becoming the symbol of resilience the monarchy desperately needed. But beneath the surface, questions simmered. They simmered through adolescence, into young adulthood, into marriage and fatherhood. They grew heavier with each passing year, each new responsibility. And then, in the most unexpected way, they erupted. The discovery of Diana's hidden letter was not the result of an official investigation or a carefully planned unveiling. It was an accident, a fluke born from the quiet dealings of estate sales and forgotten archives in a private collection belonging to a former confidant of Diana's, a woman who had remained steadfastly silent for decades. A series of documents were unearthed: personal notes, photographs, and among them, an envelope marked in Diana's familiar handwriting: "For William, open when you are ready." The confidant, facing declining health and the reality of her own mortality, chose to do what the palace never would. She contacted intermediaries she trusted, individuals committed to preserving Diana's legacy without the interference of royal handlers. Quietly, discreetly, the letter was delivered to William's private team. When the envelope was placed in William's hands, no one knew what to expect. Perhaps a sentimental note, a mother's words of love frozen in time, a small piece of comfort from a life so brutally stolen. But what William found when he opened that envelope shattered everything he thought he knew. The letter was handwritten, the ink faded, but the emotions preserved as vividly as if Diana had written them the day before. It was not a letter of bitterness or regret, it was a letter of warning, a detailed, deliberate attempt to arm her son with the truth she had known would one day matter more than anything else. She began with love, speaking of her pride in him, of her belief in his goodness and strength. But quickly, Boisu, the letter shifted into darker territory. Diana spoke plainly about her fears. She outlined the ways she had been surveilled, harassed, manipulated. She described conversations she had overheard, threats that had been made obliquely but unmistakably. And then she named names. Among those names was Camilla, not as an incidental player, but as a central figure in the betrayal Diana feared most. According to Diana's account, Camilla was not merely a passive observer of royal machinations, she was an active participant. Diana alleged that Camilla, desperate to secure her place beside Charles and fearful of Diana's enduring popularity, had blessed efforts to destabilize and isolate her efforts that included orchestrating relentless media harassment, the very harassment that culminated in that fatal chase through Paris. Diana warned William to be wary of carefully crafted narratives, to trust his instincts over official accounts, to understand that power often wears the mask of kindness. She spoke of traps laid with smiling faces and open arms, of dangers that would never be acknowledged openly, but would shape his life in ways he might not immediately recognize. The weight of the letter was staggering. It was not just a message from a mother to her son, it was a torch passed in the darkness, a desperate attempt to illuminate the dangers William had been left to navigate alone. Those close to William described his reaction as seismic. It was not just grief revisited, it was betrayal felt anew. For so long, he had been asked to accept, to forgive, to move forward. He had been encouraged to welcome Camilla into the family fold, to see her not as a usurper, but as a loving stepmother figure. He had done so with the grace expected of a future king, and now he knew that the very woman he had been taught to accept may have played a role in the most profound loss of his life. The emotional fallout was immediate and devastating. William, known for his composure, withdrew from public view for several days. He canceled appearances, citing private family matters. Those closest to him spoke of a man grappling with a tidal wave of emotions he had kept at bay for decades. Anger, sorrow, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. The discovery of the letter forced William to re-examine not only the circumstances of his mother's death, but the very foundations of his life within the monarchy. It raised painful questions about loyalty, duty, and personal integrity. How could he continue to represent an institution that had, by omission or commission, been complicit in his mother's destruction? For William, the letter was not merely a historical document. It was a mirror, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about the people around him and the roles he had been groomed to play. Privately, he began making changes. He reassessed relationships, redefined alliances, and redrew the lines of trust within his inner circle. He took a more assertive role in shaping his public image, distancing himself subtly but unmistakably from certain royal narratives. Friends noted a new steeliness in him, a resolve that had previously been masked by the need for diplomacy. William was no longer content to be merely a figurehead of continuity. He was determined to be an agent of quiet but profound change. The contents of the letter remained tightly guarded, shared only with a few trusted advisors. William understood that the full revelation of its accusations could plunge the monarchy into chaos. He understood that his mother's final warning was not just a personal message, but a political bombshell. And yet, the knowledge changed him. He began to champion causes that echoed Diana's passions: mental health, homelessness, environmental stewardship. Causes that aligned not with the sanitized, cautious image the monarchy preferred, but with the raw, human authenticity Diana had embodied. The hidden letter became a private compass, guiding William through a world where truth and appearance were often at odds. Publicly, he continued to show respect toward Camilla, maintaining the facade of family unity expected of him. But those who knew him best could see the difference. The warmth was cooler, the smiles more measured, the forgiveness more conditional. The letter also deepened William's bond with his brother, Prince Harry. Despite the strains that would later erupt between them for a time, the shared grief and the shared knowledge of betrayal drew them closer. They spoke in private about Diana's fears, her warnings, and the unfinished work she had left behind. But as time passed and their paths diverged, the letter remained a solitary burden for William, a secret too dangerous to fully share, too painful to fully forget. It is a cruel irony that the letter Diana wrote to protect her son also placed a crushing weight upon his shoulders. In seeking to shield him, she entrusted him with a truth so devastating it reshaped the course of his life. Yet in doing so, she gave him the greatest gift she could: clarity. Clarity about the dangers of unchecked power, clarity about the necessity of authenticity, clarity about the cost of silence, and perhaps most importantly, clarity about the kind of leader he must become if he hopes to honor the legacy of the woman who loved him enough to tell him the truth, even from beyond the grave. The hidden letter is not just a relic of the past, it is a living testament to a mother's courage, a son's burden, and a truth that refused to die. In the next chapter, we will explore the betrayal in deeper detail, the role Camilla allegedly played, the evidence that supports Diana's fears, and the chilling calculations that transformed one woman's life into collateral damage for a throne. The path forward is fraught with pain, but the truth, once seen, cannot be unseen, and Diana's truth is demanding to be heard. For years, the official story of Camilla Parker Bowles, later Queen Camilla, was carefully rebranded. She was framed as a victim of circumstance, a woman unfairly vilified by the press, a figure who simply loved and was loved by Charles against all odds. Public relations campaigns softened her image, portraying her as warm, earthy, and relatable. The sins of the past, we were told, were nothing more than complicated human emotions played out under the harsh glare of public life. But the hidden letter from Diana shattered that facade. Behind the carefully managed narrative was another story, one far darker and more calculating. A story of ambition cloaked in civility, of rivalry masked as reconciliation, of betrayal executed not in open confrontation, but in whispered strategy and silent orchestration. The truth, as Diana outlined it, was that Camilla's ascent to the heart of the monarchy was not accidental. It was deliberate, methodical, and merciless. In the early days of Diana's marriage to Charles, Camilla was a constant but often unseen presence, though Charles married Diana with the full pomp and ceremony expected of a future king. His emotional loyalty never truly shifted from Camilla. This emotional betrayal left Diana isolated, battling not just for her husband's affection, but for her own sense of self-worth. As Diana's popularity with the public grew, so too did resentment within certain royal circles. She was too independent, too emotional, too willing to speak her mind. Camilla, ever the insider, understood the rules of survival in ways Diana never could. She knew that in the monarchy, appearances were everything, and that true power was wielded quietly behind closed doors. According to Diana's letter, Camilla did more than tolerate the smear campaigns against Diana during the 1990s. She encouraged them. Sources close to the royal household, who have since come forward under conditions of anonymity, describe how Camilla maintained close relationships with key figures in the British media. She cultivated friendships with influential editors, journalists, and royal correspondents, offering access and information in exchange for favorable coverage, not just of herself, but of Charles. But favorable coverage required a villain. And in the court of public opinion, Diana, once the shining jewel of the monarchy, became a convenient target. Tabloids were fed stories painting Diana as unstable, unpredictable, Even manipulative leaks about her personal struggles, her battles with bulimia, her alleged affairs, her emotional volatility found their way into the headlines with uncanny timing. Meanwhile, stories about Charles and Camilla were softened, rebranded, presented with a tone of understanding and sympathy. According to insider testimony, Camilla did not need to explicitly order an attack against Diana. She merely needed to encourage the right conversations, hint at the right narratives, nudge the media machinery already hungry for scandal in the direction that suited her purposes. The most damning accusation in Diana's hidden letter, however, goes beyond media manipulation. Diana alleged that Camilla was aware of and silently endorsed efforts to escalate the harassment Diana faced from the paparazzi. These were not isolated incidents of freelance photographers acting independently. Diana described coordinated patterns of surveillance, aggressive pursuit, and psychological pressure designed to destabilize her public image and her private peace. She wrote of being followed by vehicles that bore no press credentials, of strangers photographing her from concealed positions, of leaks about her movements that could have only come from within royal circles. She spoke of a campaign not merely to embarrass her, but to entrap her, to force her into situations where mistakes could be photographed, misinterpreted, and broadcast around the world. And most chillingly, she warned that the escalation would not stop until it broke her physically, emotionally, or both. The night of the crash in Paris, seen through this lens, takes on a horrifying clarity. The sudden, overwhelming convergence of paparazzi was not a coincidence. It was the final act in a long, orchestrated campaign of pressure. Camilla's alleged role, as described by Diana, was not that of a passive observer. She was an enabler, a silent architect of circumstances that stripped Diana of her privacy, her dignity, and ultimately her life. This revelation, of course, begs a crucial question: why the answer lies in the brutal realities of power within the monarchy. Diana, even divorced from Charles, remained a towering figure in the public imagination. Her influence eclipsed that of the royal family itself. Her humanitarian work, her connection to the public, her refusal to play by traditional royal rules, all posed a threat to the future Charles and Camilla envisioned. For Charles to marry Camilla and secure her acceptance as his consort, Diana's presence needed to be diminished. Her continued existence as the people's princess, her looming shadow over any new royal narrative, made that impossible. Removing Diana physically from the royal equation may have never been explicitly plotted in smoky backrooms, but creating conditions where she was perpetually harassed, undermined, and endangered achieved the same end by different means. It allowed the monarchy to claim innocence, to mourn publicly, to rewrite history as the tragedy of circumstance rather than the consequence of deliberate choices. Camilla's transformation from royal mistress to queen consort was not simply the result of enduring love, prevailing against adversity. It was the culmination of years of careful image management, strategic alliances, and the systematic destruction of the one woman who stood in the way. Even after Diana's death, Camilla's path to acceptance was slow and calculated. She and Charles waited years before making their relationship official. Their public appearances were carefully staged, their media coverage meticulously managed. Every step was taken with the understanding that the public's memory of Diana Beau was a powerful obstacle. When Camilla finally married Charles in 2005, it was with the understanding that she would not initially assume the title of Princess of Wales, a title forever linked to Diana. The monarchy understood the dangers of appearing to replace Diana too quickly or too callously. But over time, through relentless PR efforts and the natural fading of public outrage, Camilla's image softened. She became seen as a supportive wife, a champion of charities, a figure of stability beside a future king. The betrayal, however, remained hidden. The public was asked to move on, to forget, to rewrite their memories. The official narrative became one of reconciliation, forgiveness, and inevitable destiny. The hidden letter from Diana challenges that narrative at its core. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the monarchy's evolution was built not just on tradition and resilience, but on calculated betrayal and silent sacrifice. Camilla's alleged involvement in the campaign against Diana was not just a footnote in history. It is a foundational element of the modern monarchy's survival strategy without Diana's removal. There is no space for Camilla's rehabilitation. Without Diana's silencing, there is no smooth path for Charles's ascension with Camilla at his side. The betrayal is not just personal, it is institutional, and it is a betrayal that echoes beyond the lives of those directly involved. It speaks to the dangers of unchecked power, the ease with which truth can be manipulated, and the devastating cost of preserving appearances at any price in her letter. Diana did not call for vengeance. She called for vigilance. She asked William to remember the truth, to see beyond the masks, to trust the evidence of his own eyes and heart. It is a call that echoes louder now than ever because in confronting the betrayal of Queen Camilla's secret dealings, we are not merely settling historical scores. We are choosing to honor the life and legacy of a woman who dared to live authentically in a world that demanded submission. We are choosing to remember that justice delayed is still justice worth fighting for. And we are choosing to refuse the comfort of easy lies in favor of the painful, necessary light of truth as we continue this journey. We will examine the specific mechanisms through which Diana was cornered, the financial transactions, the media complicity, and the silent complicity of those who turned away when they could have intervened. We will see how betrayal, once set in motion, becomes a self-perpetuating force, sweeping up everyone in its path. And we will ask the most important question of all: what would Diana's life in the future of the monarchy have looked like if courage had outweighed ambition? The betrayal is written in ink and blood. Now, at last it must be read. When William read his mother's hidden letter, his world splintered. The version of events he had been asked to believe all his life. The carefully crafted story that soothed public outrage and preserved royal dignity collapsed under the weight of Diana's words. In private, William was devastated. Those close to him described a man thrown into emotional turmoil. Unlike anything he had experienced since his mother's death, there was grief. But there was also rage at the system that had lied to him, at the figures who had shaped his childhood with half-truths and omissions, at the heavy realization that duty had been built on a foundation of betrayal. He withdrew into himself, avoiding public engagements whenever possible, communicating only through trusted intermediaries. The pressure of public life, once manageable, now felt suffocating. How could he wear the mask of royal duty, knowing that the institution he represented had facilitated the destruction of the one person who had loved him most purely? The hidden letter did more than reopen old wounds. It forced William to re-examine every relationship within the royal family, every smile, every conversation, every moment of supposed reconciliation now carried the bitter aftertaste of manipulation. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, is not easily restored. As William struggled to process the letter's revelations, a darker investigation began to unfold behind the scenes. The paparazzi trap expose researchers, journalists, and independent investigators, emboldened by leaks and whistleblowers, began piecing together the full picture of the night Diana died. What they uncovered was chilling financial records pointed to suspicious payments made to key photographers involved in the Paris pursuit. Several were paid not merely for photographs, but for creating a spectacle, for ensuring that Diana's escape routes were blocked, that the pressure remained constant, that the fear was visible and unrelenting. One photographer, speaking under anonymity, confessed that he had been tipped off by an individual linked to a royal household employee. The photographer was promised a significant bonus if he could capture images of Diana in a state of distress that would be front-page material for days. The trap was set long before Diana's car left the Ritz Hotel. Coordinated routes were mapped. Exit plans were leaked. Photographers on motorcycles, cars, and even on foot converged at exactly the right time to create a gauntlet of chaos. It was not a random accident, it was an orchestrated ambush. And when the crash finally occurred, the photographers did not rush to help. They did what they had been paid to do. They documented. They captured Diana's final, fragile moments for profit and power. The public had been sold a sanitized version of events. The narrative emphasized reckless behavior and tragic chance, minimizing the more sinister elements that made the crash almost inevitable. The lies we were told were not minor distortions. They were deliberate strategies designed to protect those in power. The palace's narrative was simple and effective: blame celebrity culture, blame intrusive media, absolve the institution itself of any responsibility.